I grew up and spent all of my childhood in the north side of Burbank. This was the side you go to by passing the cobweb-infested Nickelodeon studios and over the bridge. That's the area I grew up in. I call it home, even if it does have the largest IKEA outlet in the country replacing what was originally known as First Street. This is my home. This area was known for being populated with Armenian folks, also considered to be the largest Armenian community outside of Armenia itself because it leads into Glendale, being the fourth largest city in the Los Angeles County. This was the time in my life where I had learned the most valuable lesson in racism that I could have ever asked for. See, in grammar school, the Armenian kids were mean to me. They called me names like retarded, faggot-ass white boy, and special ed. At the time, I felt a lot of misery, shame, but I didn't know why I was being targeted by them. In the fourth grade, I got my first answer from my classically racist grandfather.
Well, they're what now? Armenians? Armenians, you say? Armenians, right? That's gotta be some Middle Eastern country or something. Probably under the communist government.
Not knowing what my grandfather had just said, or even the knowledge to check to see if what he was saying was even accurate, I accepted his answer as truth. It didn't help that September 11 only happened recently, and that my teacher, too, was racist. On the day of September 11, Jason Regal, a white teacher of Joaquin Miller Elementary, said in a tone of disdain,
"So, how many of you watched the news this morning?"
Many kids raised their hand. I was clueless as to what was even going on. I didn't realize what was happening. I didn't stay up to speed with politics at that time. My teacher continued,
"A group of I mean Muslim Islamic terrorists took 2 planes and hit the World Trade Center."
One of the kids shouted,
No, they were not Armenians!
Calm down. I didn't mean it. It was a mistake. It's probably better that we didn't talk about this.
Do you see us as killers, Mr. Regal?
said Sonny, a Muslim classmate.
Jason dodged any question that brought up the subject of Muslims and Armenians, because after that, there was a hostile tension in school. Jason got into a bit of trouble, sure, but it didn't curb the fact that now students were not only mad and upset about the attacks on September the 11th, but the fact that a white teacher would equate Armenians as terrorists. It was an immediate deal breaker between the relationship of the school and the students. The school didn't really become Armenians versus white kids, but it became Armenians versus Muslims versus white kids, and I didn't understand why it existed at the time. I just wanted to be friends with people. My only friend at the time was a white kid named Michael Stevens, whose family were Mormon, but they were always welcoming of me in their house.
Jesus climbed the hill to the garden still. His steps were heavy and slow. Love and a prayer took him there to the place only he could go. Gethsemane.
They too were racist against Armenians, but only because of September the 11th. They would fly a flag in honor of the people who lost their lives in the front of their lawn, a giant never-forget flag. His father once said,
"If I was on that plane and I could have manned it, and I could have killed all those Armos on sight, then that accident would have never happened, and there would have been never a tragedy."
Using my memory from the outbreak in Jason's classroom, I assured him that the terrorists weren't Armenians. You see, to me, it was about being correct. I wouldn't want to blame Armenians for something they didn't do, despite me getting my ass kicked every day at school for it. But he then replies with,
"Sonny boy, I sure as hell don't give a damn."
So, yes, I was a young racist, but it wasn't because I felt superior to the Armenians in my classroom, no, but it was because I was told they were inherently mean by my grandfather my teacher, and the father of my best friend. Essentially, I was indoctrinated by my surroundings. Around the 8th grade, John Muir Middle School started having a week of Armenian genocide awareness. What's genocide? I asked. Eventually, I was presented with assemblies in the auditorium, educating my entire school on what happened during the Armenian genocide, a hellish attempt at erasing a race of people who were refugees of the then deceased Ottoman Empire. Because the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, Armenians wanted to live autonomously on their own as Armenians, Christians, away from Turkey. With a bruised ego in 1908, the Turkish Committee of Union and Progress, also known as CUP, organized with a nationalist group aptly known as the Young Turks. Their goal was to exterminate as many non-Turks as they could find. This would influence the committee to eventually push forward the idea of genocide in 1915. At the time, 2 million Armenians existed on Earth. After 1915, 1 million Armenians were killed. This includes the 450,000 Greeks and 300,000 Assyrians that were also completely massacred and erased. According to the International Association of Genocide Scholars, a report they did in 2005, which was right around the time I was in 8th grade, explains that, quote, "Government of the Ottoman Empire began a systemic genocide of its Armenian citizens and unarmed Christian minority population. More than 1 million Armenians were exterminated through direct killing, starvation, torture, and forced death marches."
Refuse to give in, our wounds are dripping like bloody hell. From brutal whippings to crucifixions with rusty nails. But who will listen? The truth is hidden, massacres and cruel killings. They're snatching our future kingdom and commonwealth. But where is the promised hell? They distance us from it. Well, is this what you wanted? Man, it's just making me sick to my stomach. Cause Hitler has done it afterwards, following the Ottomans' example. Can you handle me quoting his vastest words? Cause see, in 39, this how your friend spoke. After all, who remembers Armenians today? End quote, forgive and forget. No, history repeats. This leech draining this land cold. This battle against hope. We gather around, we light our candles and crowds. Tears land on the ground each year, standing so proud. Together we holding banners and shout. But it's spreading through empty space, doesn't travel the sound. Nobody wants to hear us. The population just can't see through the mess. The way you treat one case determines what people will do next. Souls can't peacefully rest till the killer's secrets confessed. Buried in our holy lands and now we don't even possess. It's taking part in my phrases, I'm blatant. But all these nations are shaking the arms of Satan. For the sake of army bases, we praying to God and make them admit it. We still hoping, but they still won't. And that's why these wounds are still open.
At that point, a lot of thoughts raced through my head. One thing I wondered was, why weren't we teaching this in textbooks? Then in history class, we learned about the Nazi Holocaust and World War II. Even though the Armenian genocide took place in World War I, there was absolutely no mention of it in the textbooks. The school was happy to demonize the Nazis who killed the Jews, but not the Young Turks who killed the Armenian Christians. I later found out that year from watching a documentary that wasn't on the Discovery Channel that the United States actually helped the Nazis, including a lot of US companies like General Motors and the Union Banking Corporation of New York City, which was owned by Prescott Bush, who was then President George W. Bush's grandfather. Fortune magazine from 1941 contains interviews of General Motors influencing the idea of money-making opportunities for when America would enter World War II, along with having already been aiding the Nazis as well as the Allied forces. And General Motors won a lawsuit against the United States government when the United States military bombed their ammunition factory in Dresden. Meanwhile, the The Union Banking Corporation of New York City was currently being investigated for violating the Trading with the Enemy Act because they have funded IG Farben, who has created 84% of Germany's explosives and the Zyklon B they used in the concentration camps, as well as paying many of Hitler's administration's payroll. So, the reason why the United States did all that they could to demonize the German Nazis, rightly so, but not the Young Turks, was because of 3 reasons. One of them being the corporate ties between American and German corporations and their influence on the war. The other reason is the race of imperialism between America and the Axis of Evil. And the third reason is because the Turkish government seeks to hide their slaughter under the rug. They will actively punish anyone who calls the Armenian genocide a genocide. This includes their own citizens, to Armenians, to even foreign investors. And given the fact that Turkey is a key member of NATO and a major exporter of goods, it gives Turkey an economic priority and privilege with NATO and the United States, even though they committed the first mass genocide of the 20th century. Most of America recognizes those events were in fact a genocide, except for a few states. Obama was the only president in American history to have shed any form of light onto this event. But this is the genocide that is constantly a victim of censorship. And of course, there are still a lot of hurt people because of it, especially after 100 years, when they were almost completely erased or extinct, only to have the world superpowers like Russia and the United States to deny such a horrific tragedy ever happening in the first place. That can really drive a lot of hate in people, and it is extremely valid hate. I think about this over time, and I continue to think about the pain that my classmates must have felt when other white kids were defending me because I was getting picked on. I regret not telling those white kids to speak for themselves because I didn't want anything to do with their bigotry. They didn't understand that the very country that they live in do not see Armenians as people at all.
They're just a bunch of dirty Muslims.
They would say when someone confronted them.
They're probably going to bomb Burbank High or something.